Welcome back to Hardball. As the Obama administration decides what to do about the Bush administration's legal decisions on interrogating detainees, let's turn to a simple question. It's a tough one. Does torture work? Bob Baer is a former CIA officer and author of The Devil We Know. Bob Baer, I'm going to bow to your knowledge of this subject. It's a cruel subject. It's a cruel business. Under duress, will people tell the truth if tortured?
Under duress, under the threat of duress, under blackmail, people will tell what they think you want to hear. It is an unreliable tool. And the reason I say this is I spent 21 years in the CIA, in and out of prisons, watching these techniques one way or another, reading reports, and the countries that tortured uniformly produced inaccurate intelligence. Torture does not work.
You're sitting with the President of the United States, our new president, Barack Obama. He faces what looks to be a ticking time bomb situation. He's gotten intel that something's coming our way that's big. He has KSM in custody. He's got Zubaydah in custody. He may have someone else in custody. Is it useful to take a crack at one of these people, to use torture if it might yield success in preventing catastrophe? Is it worth trying? That's the cutting-edge question, it seems to me.
No, that's a loaded question. Those situations almost never arise. And what happened with Abu Ghraib and the waterboarding is it was a fishing expedition, which is something entirely different. It's sort of like the local police, running everybody in when a crime's been committed and waterboarding them. It just doesn't work. There are some rare exceptions, but almost never do terrorists send two people at two different times that know each other's plans. They're just smarter than that. So what we're doing is we're giving up our values, our rule of law, for the chances of actually producing are zero.
One last time, you got Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in custody. You've got Zubaydah in custody. You believe there's another 9/11 coming. The year is 2002. Do you go to extreme measures, or do you stick with what you just said? You can't rely on torture.
You cannot rely on torture, and we did exactly that to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah, and they went on about the second wave, all these other attacks, Padilla, other ones that were only fantasies in their minds, and that's what it produced. It tied up the FBI for all these years now following these false leads. It got us nowhere, and nobody who's been on TV defending torture, including the former director Michael Hayden, can point to a single case where it saved lives. He talked about the arrest of somebody, and that was it.
If you're sitting having a drink or a cup of coffee with a bunch of CIA guys, spooks, really experts, guys that are hard men and women who've been through this for years, would they agree with you, or is this a unique position of you? Or is this a real consensus you're giving us?
It's a fairly good consensus. The CIA at the working level, people who knew the Middle East, were against this. And I've talked to my colleagues, a lot of them are out now. They said this is nothing but trouble. It doesn't work. The CIA, in its heart, has never liked this.
Well, let me give you something to quibble about. His is tough. In a letter to colleagues on April 16th, that's of this year, National Intelligence Director Dennis Blair, by the way, he's the new guy, said that, quote, high-value information came from interrogations in which those methods were used and provided a deeper understanding of the al-Qaeda organization was attacking this country. Then last night, the same Dennis Blair, now Director of National Intelligence under Barack Obama, seemed to back away from that in this statement, quote, the information gained from these techniques was available in some instances, but there is no way of knowing whether the same information could have been obtained through other means. The bottom line is these techniques have hurt our image around the world. The damage they have done to our interests far outweighed whatever benefit they gave us, and they are not essential to our national security. Your thoughts on those two, interestingly, somewhat different statements?
Well, Chris, Blair has to protect the intelligence community. It's under a lot of pressure. But I can assure you this, if there was an instance that these interrogations led directly to the savings of lives, and they could prove it, this information would be leaked by now. Simply defend the CIA and the rest of the intelligence community. And it hasn't. Now, they can prove me wrong by declassifying all this stuff, and I'll say I'm wrong, but until now they have not. They have not, including Dick Cheney, have not pointed at a single concrete instance where it worked.
Well, here's a question. What does the president think? We have a new president with a new point of view, a new worldview. He was out at the CIA at Langley the other day, and I think it's amazing that we have presidential speeches out in public at the headquarters of the CIA, what we do now. And he said that you guys, he was pointing out to the women and men who have to do the intel work, say you have to operate on a special constraint here. You can't be one of the bad guys. In other words, you can't use things like torture even if you feel like you're thinking it might work. He seemed to imply that that constraint was sort of like an arm tied behind your back if you're an American good guy. Did that to you imply that he thought that the bad guys on the other side, where we send people like in, I'm not going to mention the countries, but we can guess the list, where they don't have these scruples and do believe in torture, that they can get stuff we can't get? And that, to me, sounded like a very subtle implication. He thought we might be able to get more if we were worse, if we were nastier.
No, I think what he's saying is, listen, you guys, you were dragged into this, probably against your will, and I'm not going to punish you. Yeah, we know what we're up against, but we're going to have to maintain our values, even if we lose some of the small battles on this. But at the end of the day, again, it goes back, it is not good intelligence, and the CIA knows this.
Well, here's from the New York Times just today, quote, even George Tenet, the CIA director who insisted that the agency had thoroughly researched its proposal and pressed it on other officials, did not examine the history of the most shocking method, the near-drowning technique known as waterboarding. The top officials he briefed did not learn that waterboarding had been prosecuted by the United States in war crimes trials after World War II and was a well-documented favorite of despotic governments since the Spanish Inquisition. One waterboard used under Pol Pot was even on display at the Genocide Museum in Cambodia. What do you think of the history, the providence, if you will, of or the prominence of waterboarding? What do you make of it?
Well, you have George Tenet is bowing to pressure, White House pressure, under pressure of 9/11, and he caved in and he sacrificed the CIA by dragging it into this. And this is what we're facing. And yes, waterboarding is illegal internationally and in this country. We've prosecuted. It does go back to the Spanish Inquisition. It is torture. When you waterboard Khalid Sheikh Mohammed 183 times, I can pretty well safely say the man is almost brain dead. This is torture.
Let's talk about one last thing, which is fascinating to me. As like most of the people of our generation, I was fascinated by the film Manchurian Candidate. Who wasn't? I mean, certainly that was a film about assassinations of presidents, frightening right-wing, left-wing, all these moles. There's Lawrence Harvey. He played an American soldier who was brainwashed when he was a prisoner in the Korean War, a prisoner of the Chinese communists, who used brainwashing, we called it at the time, to try to convince a guy to do, and they did. They got him so conditioned that he was going to act as an assassin. What did you make of this report that just came out that some of the material in terms of our techniques now came from what we trained our soldiers to resist when captured by the Chinese communists in North Korea?
Google it. In 1957, an Air Force report comes out and said the Chinese did this, but the key wording is to produce false confessions. And this is what I suspect we're getting from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is a false confession. That's why the Chinese did it. That's not why we did it, but that's what we got.
So they were looking for turncoats and people to turn in their own country dishonestly by brainwashing. We're looking to get truth from people on the other side, yet we found ourselves using the techniques which had an adverse mission.
Well,
that sounds like incompetence to me.
It's embarrassment, and we're creating more enemies. Trust me. People look at this and
okay, thank you. Well said. Thank you, Bob. It's great having your expertise and your experience and your patriotism available to us. Thanks for joining us, Bob Baer. Still